Oh Lord. How does that look on the screen? Does that look normal? Oh goodness. Okay, I think I may have gotten it. Hopefully,
Okay.
we will
Well,
only
we will
find out
test
later.
Well, friends, great to see you. It's hard to believe that this is the final session of our now 6 weeks together. And delighted that Kyle Farmbry will be able to lead off. An Uber is coming to pick him up uh, later on during this hour, but he can spend some time with us to introduce himself as the president of Guilford College and share a bit about his experience thus far and his vision for the college, and hopefully field some of your questions. First of all, I'd like to see a show of hands of the Guilford alumni out there. How many Guilford alumni in the crowd? Okay. Former Guilford staff. Okay. Guilford parents. You have a receptive audience, Kyle. I'll hand it over to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So thank you very much, Max and Mary, for inviting me. And it's good to meet all of you virtually. I look forward to an in-person meeting, particularly as I just saw all those hands go up for alumni and staff and parents. That's very encouraging to know that so many of you were there. And for those of you who did not raise your hands, we'll still consider you part of the Guilford family. So you will be included in whatever types of good Guilford messages and thoughts we send out to everyone. I am now 1 month and 9 days into this new role. I have figured out where some of the buildings are. I figured out where the cafeteria is, and I figured out where some of the restrooms are, all of which are important things to know on a campus. And it's been a really amazing month and days. I was very excited prior to my officially starting Guilford back in October, November, and December as I visited the college, and now that I've moved onto campus, all of my expectations have actually been exceeded. One of the things that I think I found to probably be the most rewarding has been a lot of the time that I've been able to spend listening to people who have history with Guilford, and I think that's part of why I look forward to being able to have some in person time with many of you because I enjoy just sort of listening to people, and I enjoy listening to the stories of people, and particularly when there's a common thread to the story, such as Guilford, that's always a real delight. We are in the process of doing some exciting things over here. We're on the very front end of developing or starting a strategic planning process that will help to take us into the next 5 or 10 or perhaps even 15 years. And we have some staff that have started to assemble around that plan. I don't know if any of you have been involved with earlier Guilford strategic planning processes, but we're looking forward to this being a very community-driven initiative where we want the voices of alumni and students and faculty and staff and others with connections to Guilford to really drive a lot of what we learn through that planning process and ultimately what we decide to implement as a result of that process. So that's a bit of an invitation to all of you as folks who have a link to the college to join us as we begin to do some reflection on who we are and where we're headed over the next few years. We are in the mechanisms of setting up that strategic planning process. We are thinking a lot about a notion that I've become very fond of, and that notion is for something that's referred to as an anchor institution. And an anchor institution is basically an institution that is well grounded in the community that institution is part of. And what I want us to sort of start to think about is Guilford as not necessarily a college that's here in Greensboro, but Guilford is being a college that is of Greensboro. So are trying to build some of the linkages and some of the common understanding of the opportunities and the challenges and everything that's part of this broader community, which we are uh, very happy participant within. So I guess what I would actually like to do is see if we might have some time for some back and forth in terms of some questions and some dialogue versus my sort of talking to you about some of the different things that are underway. So maybe we should sort of stop and see if folks have any thoughts or things just to sort of share with me or that you'd like me to respond to in terms of Guilford. And I know I just saw a whole bunch of hands go up when Max asked how many people are alumni or faculty or parents of or grandparents of Guilford students. So I know we have some people there who know the institution.
Now they get all shy. I also have a microphone. So if you raise your hand, I'll come to you, and hopefully that'll help. And I will chat or post it in the chat as well. So hopefully we'll get there. Bob? Yeah. Give me 1 second.
At New Garden, we were in a session with Wes Daniels about the Friends Center and Quaker Leadership Scholarship Program, and it was on shaky ground for a while, and I knew even Wes Daniels didn't have a job for a while. So can you tell us where this is at the moment, what kind of staffing they have, what kind of concrete plans they have in the future?
Sure. And let me start off perhaps by talking about Wes. Wes has been a tremendous resource person as I've gotten to know Guilford and the community. In fact, I bumped into Wes a few days in the cafeteria, and he had his 14-year-old daughter with him. And I shared with him that I have a soon-to-be 14-year-old stepdaughter be moving here. So we really need sort of as many 14-year-old guides to help my soon-to-be stepdaughter to get acclimated. So Wes and his daughter immediately said they'd be willing to help with that. So I think Wes is not only completely growing to be a colleague, but also I would say a friend here at Guilford. The Quaker Leader Scholarship Program is doing well, from my understanding. I believe they just had some additional support that's been generated for the program. They're in the early stages of recruiting for their next class. They actually just hired someone, an additional staffer, to help with outreach and some of the community building that the Friends Center and the Quaker Leader Scholarship Program has been involved with. I am familiar that for a little while, I don't know the full situation for which Wes wasn't here, but I'm really glad that he is now. And back when I was interviewing and coming to campus back in fall, he was just tremendous in terms of in helping me to understand more about Guilford. I'll also just share, since you mentioned Wes in the context of New Garden Friends, I had an opportunity on Sunday to join New Garden Friends, and one of my hopes is that over time to just spend more time with both folks at New Garden Friends and also with some of the different Quaker meetings throughout Greensboro and in other places, which is I think one of the really nice things about Zoom. You can join and visit with different communities that you might not be able to when you're not on Zoom. So I enjoyed my experiences there and forward to visiting with them and others.
If I can add in just briefly, Kyle mentioned a new staff person with QSP. Some of you may remember Liz Nicholson, 2012 graduate of Guilford College, who was co-clerk of QSP while she was at Guilford, and she was in the founding class of the Quaker Voluntary Service Program, which was founded by another QLSPer, Christina Repoli. Half of the original class of QVS were Guilford graduates. And Liz has just come on as the new director of QLSP. And I also understand they just hired a new multi-faith coordinator as well, Megan McNeely. So as I understand it, Friend Center is now again fully staffed. Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. We have another question from a very, very, very familiar face. You'll hear it.
Well, this is not a question, Kyle, but I thought I ought to take the opportunity to introduce myself since we're talking about the Friend Center. I'm Judith Harvey, and I was the first director of the Friend Center back many years ago. And it's been just so special to me to see the whole program grow and the meaning of having a Quaker Center on campus and for Guilford College. So I look forward to meeting you personally very much.
Thank you. I look forward to meeting you as well. If I can, sort of reflecting a little more on Friend Center and the QLSP program, one of the things that I think I've been actually most excited about as I've been thinking about some of the ways that we engage with our students is that we have a number of fellowship programs, QLSP being one of our, I think, one of our largest and, is perhaps more active fellowship programs. And as we think about some of Guilford's transitions over the next 2 years, as many of you are aware, we just finished up something called the Guilford Forward Fund, which was a sort of campaign that helped to get us through, a kind of a rough patch over the past 2 years. And we ended that Guilford Forward Fund far ahead of expectations. It set a goal of raising $6 million, we raised $6.7 million. And one of the next steps that I want us to think about are sort of growing our scholarship opportunities and looking at things like QLSP and other sort of scholarship and fellowship opportunities where you can really directly impact students and grow sort of additional leadership mechanisms for that. So I'm having some conversations with my team on ways of using some of these scholarships and programs as a way of galvanizing the energy that these students can bring to not only Guilford, but against the broader community.
I'm not going to embarrass the person by naming the person who is present in the room presently, but there is a person there who, with his wife, were very responsible for putting Friend Center on a very firm financial foundation several years ago through a challenge grant. And no one thought that we could meet the challenge. It was initially a $100,000 challenge, and we went over the top and very generously offered a second year of the challenge. And through that generosity and subsequent generosity, put together quite a package that has ensured Friend Center sustainability well into the future. So much gratitude to the unnamed person there in the second row.
All right, I think we have another comment or question.
Dave McGinnis here, faculty, ex-faculty, chemistry, and also 5 years head of faculty development. And I'm wondering how you see the faculty growing at Guilford. Do you see what support the administration is willing to give or let the faculty give for themselves? We actually had funding for faculty development for study grants and for various programs, and faculty would get together and learn certain things. And I don't know if you know much about the history of that, but I think faculty development is very important for Guilford.
I agree. And when I tend to think about strategies for enhancing faculty development, I tend to think about three different routes. One is based on current funding. That's through the traditional pools, the tuition revenues and other sort of traditional budgets in place. The other is looking at fundraising that's specifically done for faculty development. I know that we have some gifts that have been made that have really focused on faculty development. In fact, I had a conversation with one of our trustees a few days ago who has really challenged, or it really channeled a lot of her giving to the institution specifically for faculty development funds. The third that I often think about is development that comes as faculty, get really creative about leveraging resources and opportunities through federal funding or through different foundations, or in some cases, corporations that might have some sort of charitable arm. And we've been trying to think about ways that we can actively work with our advancement office to more actively target some of the foundation support and some of the federal and state funding resources, so that we can, as part of our requests and part of our packages, include faculty development opportunities as part of what we're doing.
Great, thank you.
I'm Charlie White, former staff. In the dark ages, a couple of years ago, the humanities were threatened. I understand there's a new data management major being developed. What direction do you think the academic program will go? Do you have any sense that we will retain the humanities as we used to know them?
Yeah. I can't imagine a liberal arts college without a strong foundation in the humanities. And I think that in fact, I just had this question come to me yesterday at a meeting with with a number of faculty, and someone asked about my perspective and take on the humanities. So A, I think that the questions of how do we enhance and grow and strengthen the humanities. B, I think that there's an important discourse that we need to build around the sort of role of the humanities today versus the role of the humanities 20 years ago, and how we might forecast the role of humanities in sort of educational experiences 20 years from now. And within that, there's a bit of work that needs to be done in terms of, I would almost say, revisiting, perhaps articulating, and I would probably even say protecting the humanities in kind of a broader discourse beyond Guilford. So part of my job I see as one of not only advocating for Guilford and all of our programs and our students and faculty, etc., but also working to sort of shore up and defend a lot of the core areas that we're involved with. So my role as a president is to work with other presidents where and from colleges where humanities play a critical role, or where the liberal arts play a critical role, and to articulate as much as we can the real value that the humanities and liberal arts bring to kind of a broader society. And I think that in some ways is a little bit of a challenge because unfortunately, one of the messages out there is that a student should go and get an undergrad degree in sort of less humanities focused fields. There are a lot of parents who are out there saying, "Well, how exactly are you going to get a job to their son or daughter with a degree in X, Y, and Z?" But one of the things that we're finding as we talk with people who are in leadership positions in different organizations is that it's their training in the humanities and in the liberal arts that really gave them the critical analysis skills and the reflective skills that help them to get to those positions. So part of my line in the sand is I think about the argument for the humanities and the argument for sort of the larger and the broader liberal arts is to basically say that we really want to build a society with critical thinkers, with reflective thinkers, and we're only going to be able to do that if we support and encourage the humanities.
Thank you.
I'm Mae Brown, and I graduated from Guilford in 19. There you go. I graduated in 1946. I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about your family, how they are adjusted to Greensboro and North Carolina. Thank you.
So I have a fiance, and I said earlier, soon to be stepdaughter, and that's why the soon to be stepdaughter who will be moving here in sometime this summer. We haven't locked in a date because we're looking at summer camps and the end of the school year and all that kind of stuff. And actually, my flight out this afternoon is up to the Washington, D.C. area to see them, because I've not seen them for a few weeks now. And they're excited about the move. I will say, the Ava, who is the daughter, is feeling a little nervous because at 14, you have your friends, and the idea of moving to a community where you don't know of everything that community has to offer could be it can cause some anxiety. So we are trying to find ways to get Ava as excited as her mom and I are. And I think we're on a path to doing so. We're all really, really excited about building our lives here.
And you told her about cheer wine and ham biscuits.
I have not told her about cheer wine and ham biscuits.
Somebody said the best of North Carolina under their breath.
Okay.
They're not wrong.
We have another one.
Good afternoon. I'm Judy Reese. I graduated in '64, and I have a daughter that graduated and a son-in-law who graduated from Guilford. I was wondering when you were interviewing and picking a place to come, what about Guilford really helped you make that decision?
There were a few things. One is I actually reached out to a few people that I knew that were teaching at Guilford. I also had a very good friend from high school who attended Guilford, and from everyone that I reached out to, the message was pretty straightforward. It was Guilford is a really wonderful place, and there are a lot of people who care about this institution. I think by virtue of all the hands I just saw that went up in this room, people who have some sort of history with Guilford, that says to me that people get connected to Guilford and they stay connected to Guilford. So those sort of words of support and encouragement about the institution were important to me. The fact that it is a small liberal arts institution were important to me. My career has been spent in large state institutions. Rutgers University in the system has 70,000 students. My campus had about 15,000. Prior to that, I was at a school with about 13,000, and before that, about 30,000. So, the idea of coming to a college with 1,400 students, I just excited about getting to know my students are and what they're about, and getting to know all my colleagues. I spent two, I think, really important years when I was going to school in Philadelphia, where I grew up. My 7th and 8th grade years were spent at a school called Germantown Friends. And I think that there is a sort of level of social awareness and engagement that I learned through those 2 years of a Quaker influenced education. And those were important in terms of, I think, helping me to become who I ultimately am. And I enjoyed the fact of sort of the Quaker history and the Quaker influence, and a lot of the sort of the background of Quakers of sort of shaping what Guilford is as an institution. And then it's a really beautiful campus. It's nice to walk around here. I'm sitting in the Ragsdale House, which is the president's house on campus. And I'm looking out the window, and there's some beautiful trees and a really beautiful lake, and we've got the Guilford Woods with a piece of what was the Underground Railroad. So this is a place that has just tremendous history, and it's a tremendous.
All the way in the back, they like to make sure that I get my exercise every time we have something in the living room.
Hi, my name is Tina Ganji, and I grew up mostly in Greensboro, which was my father's hometown. And I will tell you, I never attended Guilford, except I did take some adult ed courses here at one time. But my father was actually a one-year student at Guilford when he was only 16, and his parents did not want him to go too far away from home at that point. After 1 year at Guilford, he transferred to Trinity, which became Duke, as we know. And so I've always had warm feelings about the school, and I will tell you that when I was visiting and I did have a chance to take the adult ed classes, it made me wonder, in listening to you today, will there be growth of adult ed courses? As I recall, I took mine off campus somewhere downtown.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's I understand there used to be a downtown building or campus for Guilford where a lot of the adult education courses were held. And my understanding, and I'm still sort of learning the history on what exactly happened, because we used to have a very big adult education program. And I think that between the traditional student population and the adult ed population, we at one point were hovering around 3,000 students, and we're between I think sort of about 1,300 to 1,400 right now. I've heard that there were some shifts in terms of state funding, and the sort of we weren't able to draw as much in terms of support from the state, and that had a big impact in terms of the shrinking of our adult education program. I understand that there were also just some administrative decisions that were made in terms of not investing in the adult education program as much as perhaps the program had been invested in prior to. We have someone who's working out of the provost's office to interrogate both what happened and also what might happen, because we do very much believe that, or at least I believe, and members of my cabinet believe that that sort of adult education is very much worth investing in. And there are a number of ways that we can build some of these different programs. There's traditionally adult education as we think about it. We are also looking at developing one or two more graduate programs that will allow for us to bring another sort of demographic into to the school. The answer is yeah. The whole idea of growing and developing some of our adult offerings is very much on our plans.
Most of my professional life was in the community college system in Connecticut, and I will tell you that we continue to have adult non-credit courses, and they were very profitable. So pass that along for what it's worth.
Thank you. I think I have time for one, probably one more, and then I've got Then I've got a student now. Is there another question or comment or thought? And if not, did I just
We
see?
have one.
Okay.
Francis Young from graduate of Rider University. What do you see as the most important challenge for Guilford at this moment?
Well, I think we need to make sure that our enrollments are up and that they're stable. There's a bit of a sort of broader challenge there, but it's something that higher ed institutions across the country are facing. We have basically sort of a shrinking population of sort of the traditional college age students, the folks between 18 and 22, 23. So we just sort of have to think about, as partially relates to the adult education question earlier, we just need to think about offerings to different groups of students to meet that challenge. So I think that's probably the biggest, and that then obviously has an impact on our finances and other things that we wrestle with as an institution. And I'm comfortable. I've seen the numbers for the number of students who've applied and that we've admitted for this incoming class. We've actually we've received deposits and we've admitted more students than we have in the past few years. Of course, last year was a little bit of an odd year because of the impact of COVID and on enrollments, but over the past few years, and I'm feeling very, very optimistic based on those numbers. So I'd like to thank you for the invitation, and Max, it's always really nice to see you.
You too.
Max and I have had some quite a few Zoom meetings. We've yet to meet in person, and I'm looking forward to doing that at some point soon. And it's nice to meet all of you. And yeah, I hope that we can do something in person at some point in the near future.
I think everybody here could agree, and I just sent that in the chat as well. So thank you very much. Can we wave to him and say thanks? Clap. Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle.
Sure. Bye.
Safe flight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for your questions as well. We're all quite excited about Kyle's coming to Guilford and feel that he'll serve well. He mentioned in his comments about his vision of Guilford being an anchor institution in Greensboro, and just following up on last week's conversation about the Civil War and post-Civil War period and leading into what remains of our hour and the current status of Quakers in North Carolina. I want to mention that in between last week and this week, I've learned more about a person I'd not heard of before last week, DeWitt Binbow. How many of you know about DeWitt Binbow? He was, of course, of the Binbows of Oak Ridge. Many of you remember Bob Binbow, late of New Garden Meeting. DeWitt Binbow went to the Binbow Academy up there in Oak Ridge in the pre-Civil War period, became a dentist, and was flourishing at the beginning of the Civil War with a practice down in Fayetteville. But as a Quaker, was challenged by the war and the possibility of the Confederate draft. And so was one of those who opted for hiring a substitute. It didn't really mean paying someone to serve in his place, but paying the $500 fee to not be drafted and moved his family to Greensboro, where after the war, he built the Binbow House, the first luxury hotel in Greensboro near the railroad tracks. He saw the future of Greensboro being a railroad center. That was on the site of where Woolworths is now, and the Civil Rights Museum. Became quite wealthy through various businesses, and in the course of the late 1800s was involved in transitioning the New Garden boarding school into Guilford College. He served on the committee that saw that transition. After the fire that destroyed what is now Greensboro College, he paid for the repairs and the work to get Greensboro College up and running. He got the A&M University to come to Greensboro, now North Carolina A&T State University, and got Bennett College going with the help of some others, and worked with Charles McIver and Mary Mendenhall Hobbs to get the industrial and normal training school for white girls, women's college, now UNCG, going. Talk about an anchor of every institution of higher education in the Greensboro. But fascinating to learn more about Benbow. But want to move on in the last half of this hour to talk about the impact of what we ended last week's session on, and that was the 1870 revivals that came to North Carolina. As you may recall, Alan Jay recognized that with so many young people going off to the revivals down there in Trinity, eventually, as you heard earlier, became Duke, in the town of Trinity, realized that if you lost the next generation of young friends down here, there wouldn't be a future for Quakers. And so, in negotiations with the elders and ministers of especially the Springfield Friends meeting, gained their permission for him to accompany the children to these revivals with their promise that they would remain Quaker even if they went forward and were convinced through the emotionalism of those revivals. Eventually, the parents of these children and the elders and the ministers recognized what an impact this spiritual vitality had had on the children, and asked Alan Jay to lead a series of revivals himself in the Springfield Meeting House. He did on several understandings. One was he was an old quietist Quaker, although of an evangelical bent. And he said, I will not prepare messages. We will have worship in the manner of friends, and if the Spirit leads me to preach, I will preach. But I will not go with a prepared text or prepared scripture. Furthermore, I will not impose an altar call. I will not impose vocal prayer or singing, which were unheard of in old quietist Quakerism at the time. But if the Spirit leads and people come forward to an anxious bench, or break out in singing, or vocal prayer, I won't stand in the way, but I will not force feed these new measures down people's throats. And he did for, I think, more than a week, held these special meetings in the old Springfield Meeting House, and it added 150 new members to that meeting. Some of the religious leaders in High Point, recognizing the impact of the revivals in Trinity and the Springfield revivals, wanted to hold their own series of revivals. And some of you know this story. Being competing denominations in High Point, they couldn't agree on who was going to be the preacher, so they asked the Quaker, they asked Alan Jay if he would lead this series of revivals for High Point, and he gave them the same criteria. I will, but you have to understand, I will not be given a text, I will not come with prepared text or scripture, I will not impose on others. And for 29 consecutive days, he preached in the High Point revivals, and the Spirit led him to have a message, with the exception of one night. You have to read his autobiography to get that story. He eventually did, but it's a fascinating story. Well, the impact of these revivals in the 1870s on Friends is that it increased their membership from, I've read, from around 2,000 to around 8,000. And of course, most of this addition came from people who hadn't been raised in Quaker culture, weren't familiar with Quaker customs and distinctives and theology. behind those distinctives. And so very soon you had members of these meetings questioning these old customs. Why don't we have hymns? Why don't we have prepared messages? Why do we have this strange language of these and thous? Why are we dressing so peculiarly? And many, especially coming out of the evangelical theology of the revivals, saw these outward forms as works righteousness, accusing friends of trying to win their salvation or win their way into heaven by these forms. And within 10 years, most of those forms, most of those peculiarities of friends were beginning to disappear. And if you want to get a good sense of that, read Tom Ham's The Transformation of American Quakerism. It's a fascinating look at how just between the late 1860s and late 1870s, there's this dramatic change in practices among Friends, especially the Orthodox Gurneyite Friends. Well, what Quaker polity and the absence of any Quaker seminaries or a history of ordained clergy meant was that these people who became Friends and joined Quaker meetings wanted to have the kind of leadership that other Protestants had. And in some cases, they simply retained a revival preacher. In other cases, they had volunteers from the meeting's membership themselves lead the worship. But there was no systematic understanding of how you adopt a pastoral system. So it arose hodgepodge, willy-nilly, and that invited in a number of people who were trained as preachers or who saw opportunity among Friends to become preachers, especially women. There are a number of women who didn't have opportunity to be preachers in their own Methodist or Baptist or other denominations, and so saw an opportunity to come to Friends and become pastors, but brought their own theology with them. Over the decades, that had quite an impact on the nature of Quakerism, not only here, but in the Midwest and further west, as more and more people came in from the outside into leadership of the Society of Friends, bringing their own understandings with them. Because there had been such a long opposition among Friends to the hirely ministry to theological education, the only place that Quakers had for training those who might be in future leadership was in the Bible departments of the Quaker colleges. There was no seminary for Friends. The first seminary for Quakers was the Earlham School of Religion in 1960. So we had essentially a pastoral system for 100 years before we had a Quaker seminary training them. And of course, that raises some issues. One of the issues was that in the early 1900s, there was quite a tussle over these Bible departments, especially at Earlham. I assume there was probably some tussle down here around Guilford. But up at Earlham, in the early 1900s, there were some very strong, powerful, well-respected Bible scholars, theology scholars in the Bible department of Guilford College. But at the same time, in the early 1900s, you had the emergence of the modernist fundamentalist debates, concerns by fundamentalist Christians, or more evangelical conservative Christians, about the new scholarship coming from Germany, form criticism, higher criticism, redaction criticism, analyzing the Bible and theology the same way you would any other literature, any other text. And there's great suspicion of that new scholarship. But that was adopted by the professors there at Earlham, and a committee was formed in Indiana yearly meeting to address that concern that the Bible department training the leadership of Society of Friends in Indiana and the Midwest was too liberal, too modernist. And some of you may remember Elmer Brown. Elmer Brown's father was the chair, the clerk of that committee that eventually saw to it to get rid of Albert Russell, Clarence Pickett, and there was one other. It didn't quite ruin their careers. Albert Russell went on to become the dean of the Duke Divinity School, and Clarence Pickett went on to be the head of the American Friends Service Committee. The third was Alexander Purdy, who went on to be the dean of the Hartford Divinity School. But they expunged those modernist professors. Now, down here at Guilford, I don't know, the history of what the Bible department went through, but I do know this story. It goes back to the 1990s. When I first came down here in 1990, the controversies that eventually led to the dissolution of North Carolina Yearly Meeting were beginning to bubble up. And at the first session of North Carolina Yearly Meeting that I attended in Dana Auditorium in 1990, some of the evangelical pastors called for a special caucus over in the moon room of Dana Auditorium to consider how they would address the problem with the liberal meetings and liberal ideas in the yearly meeting. And the conversation in the moon room, as I sat in to listen to it, was heading in the direction of, we've got to find a way to drive these people out. When it was heading that way, one of the young evangelical pastors stood up and said, I'm really not comfortable with this, and told the story of how he had been a student at Guilford as an evangelical Quaker, and took a class with Crownfield. I'm forgetting his first name, but anyway, Fred Crownfield. And Frederick Crownfield was one of those liberal Bible professors at Guilford. And at the final exam, this young pastor said, Frederick Crownfield handed out the exam and said, now I expect you to respond to these questions appropriate to how I've taught you this semester. But I know that many of you don't agree with anything that I have told you. But I expect you to answer the questions appropriately to the best of scholarship we've studied. But at the end of your papers, you can write, I have answered these questions according to the instructions of my professor. I don't believe a word of it, and anyone who does is going to hell. And he said that ought to be our attitude, kind of the old Moravian understanding of, in essentials, unity, in non-essentials, liberty, in all things, love. And it diffused that little caucus. Well, through the 20th century, these issues, the modernist fundamentalist debates, concerns about, on one end of the theological spectrum here, of these outsiders coming in and changing the nature of Quakerism, or the other end of the spectrum, concerns about these liberals coming in with their ideas, either from their seminaries or their own theological influence. By the late 20th century, most of you know the sad history that it led to eventually the dissolution of North Carolina Yearly Meeting, FUM. The issues were not just about theology and differences around theology, but also around cultural issues, even political issues, social issues. The first one I was aware of coming down here in the 1990s was around New Age theology. There was a concern raised by the Pastoral Meeting Relations Committee in North Carolina Yearly Meeting, FUM, about some meetings that were studying texts that others didn't approve of. There was actually a suggestion by the Yearly Meeting that any New Age books be banned in Quaker and Friends meetings. that never got to be a dictate because they couldn't define what New Age necessarily was. The pastor of Jamestown stood up and asked, well, sometimes I quote the Buddha in my sermons. Is that New Age? So there wasn't a clear definition, so that didn't go that far. Then, of course, other issues like gay marriage, homosexuality, some of the hot button issues came down the pike, and that led to ongoing controversy. And we don't have time to go into all of that, but some 4 years ago, as most of you sadly know, North Carolina Yearly Meeting, this 319-year-old institution, was no more. And out of that came both the North Carolina Fellowship of Friends and the Friends Church of North Carolina, but also a number of independent meetings simply left the yearly meeting and became independent, or a few joined in a small association called, I think, the Atlantic Friends Mission. So there were several different outcomes of that breakup. But unfortunately, many simply left Friends, became community churches, and adopted everything from outward sacraments, baptism and communion to other non-Quaker distinctives. But that wasn't the only association of Friends in North Carolina. There's the Southern Appalachian Yearly Meeting Association out towards the mountains, SEMA. There's the Piedmont Friends Yearly Meeting. There's North Carolina Yearly Meeting Conservative. And there's Evangelical Friends Church Eastern Region. The evangelical meetings that were set off from Old Ohio Yearly Meeting Damascus that went Evangelical Friends Church Eastern Region. And independent meetings. So there's still a large community of friends in North Carolina of different associations. Some of you may be familiar with two Quaker Leadership Scholars Program graduates of the early 2000s, Betsy Blake and Coleman Watts. When they met at Guilford in the late 1990s, Coleman was from liberal Baltimore Yearly Meeting, unprogrammed. Betsy had a fundamentalist Quaker preacher father and came out of the program FUM Yearly Meeting here in North Carolina. They met, and sparks flew the first year or two as they tried to understand each other. By the time they were seniors, they were close friends, understood each other very well, and went on to produce a video called Can We All Be Friends? Examine the differences among Quakers here in Greensboro as an example for friends elsewhere, what the different branches of Friends were. And this examination of the differences of Friends simply looked at 4 Quaker meetings within a buggy ride at the Guilford College campus. A New Garden meeting, which had a foot in the FGC world. Friendship, which is in the conservative branch of Friends. First Friends, Old Greensboro Monthly Meeting, which is an FUM meeting, and Hunter Hills, which is an Evangelical Friends Church Eastern Region. So right here in Greensboro, you have 4 distinctive associations of friends, and further out and about, you have even other varieties. We don't have much time left, but I want to simply say that, one, before we open it up for some questions or your own comments, one of the things I always told my students about the differences among friends and why the old saw goes, if you have 5 Quakers in a room, you'll have 6 opinions on any given thing, or if you have 5 Quakers in town, there'll be 6 meeting houses, is that Quakers are a bit like tofu. We have substance, but tend to get our flavor from whatever we're stewing in at the time. And where Quakers are in a liberal environment, like a college town, urban setting, they're going to pick up that flavor. It attracts people from that kind of background. And again, as we know, these devil's institutions of liberal colleges and universities, have those sorts of ideas. In other settings, more conservative, friends are going to look like that. It will attract people from that kind of background. And those communities have a history. If you go back all the way 200 years ago to the Hicksite Orthodox separation, that really set in motion some of these great changes. The Hicksites were conservative, rural folk. The Orthodox were typically more urban, more liberal, because they had access to wider understandings of thinking and represented their own environments, urban versus rural, church mouse versus city mouse. And if you take a look at the map of Quakers in North Carolina, Quakers are just as blue county and red county as everything else. It's blue state, red state sorts of things here. So that has an impact as well. So it's not just theology, it's also culture and sociology, and Quakers are in that same mix as all the other cultural issues of today. So let me end there. We're towards the end of our hour, but what questions you have, or insights you have? Many of you have lived through this far longer than I have here in North Carolina and have experienced most of this. Bob, you had a question?
Oh, man.
Not really.
Nope.
Man. I think Kyle might have stolen all your questions.
Yeah.
Limited amount.
It's going to be interesting for Kyle, because Kyle, of course, his exposure to Quakerism was up in Philadelphia and New Jersey, where all the meetings are unprogrammed. And I know that quite a few Quaker students who came down to Guilford for the Quaker Leadership Scholars Program were shocked that there were programmed pastoral friends. They'd never heard of such. My first year teaching at Friends Select School in 1982, and I was on my doctoral work in Philadelphia, I was sitting with the head of Friends Select School, which was founded in 1688. Truxton Hare was the head, longtime Quaker in Philadelphia early meeting. He was asking my background, and I mentioned to him that I'd grown up in the program pastoral branch of Friends. And his jaw dropped. He said, "There are pastoral friends? There are friends with pastors?" And he called Stephanie Judson over, who taught Quaker studies at Friends Select at the time. Said, "Stephanie, have you ever heard of this? There are Quakers who have pastors." Stephanie said, "Truxton, if you would get out of Philadelphia on occasion, yes, you would know that." But it's going to be interesting for Kyle to meet the different types of friends. This was a wonderful place to teach Quaker studies at Guilford, because it's a living laboratory of the diversity of Quakers. Again, within a buggy ride campus, you had every branch of Friends. And that, you can't say that in most other places.
I think we have two, so I'll hand over here, and then I'll go back to you, May, okay?
Can you tell us the origins of North Carolina yearly meeting conservative? How far back does it go?
I really ought to hand this off to folk there who are members of North Carolina Conservative, but this is interesting.
My grandma went to Salem Branch meeting. That's one
Yeah. North Carolina, pretty much unique among Quakers in North America, did not have any separations through the 1800s. Through the Hicksite Orthodox, Wilburite, Gurneyite, Otisite, Kingite, Updegraffite, Holiness separations, North Carolina Yearling didn't have separations for a couple major reasons. One was Nathan Hunt told them not to. Nathan Hunt was the patriarch who held the thing together. And they had bigger fish to fry. The migration out left the community decimated. You were down to, again, fewer than 2,000. And a lot of kinship and relations that kept yearly meeting together, even though there were differences. When the pastoral movement came in, the program meeting came in, the great changes of the 1870s came in, conservative friends with a capital C didn't adopt them, but kind of had a live and let live attitude that, okay, we don't approve of this, but fine, we can get along as long as they don't tell us what to do. Now, the great changes led to a conference of the Orthodox Gurneyite yearly meetings in Richmond, Indiana in 1887. So many changes were coming in. There were people pushing for outward sacraments, the pastoral movement was coming in. All these great changes were coming in all of a sudden. And so, who are we? We've got to figure this out. And the 1887 conference up in Richmond came out with the Declaration, the Richmond Declaration, which has been very controversial over the years, laying out what was acceptable for Friends. They did not please the Updegraffites, the Waterites up in Ohio yearly meeting in Damascus. David the Updegraff was present, and he was pushing for outward sacraments, for entire sanctification, and his Wesleyan holiness theology. And that was not adopted, so he was not pleased. But they allowed for the differences with hireling ministers and more programmed understandings and a very strong focus on the authority of the Bible. Well, again, conservative capital C friends weren't overly enthusiastic about all this, but again, no one was telling them what to do in some of their outposts. But early 1900s, in 1902, 5 Years Meeting is founded out of the Richmond Declaration community. They started meeting every 5 years after 1887 as an organization of friends who had adopted the Richmond Declaration of Faith. And they formed 5 Years Meeting in 1902 and adopted a uniform discipline. This is how our constituent yearly meetings and meetings are to conduct their lives. And the conservative friends said, that's it. We could tolerate you singing your hymns and having hireling ministers and programmed worship and all of that. But when you start telling us what to do, then we're out of here. In 1904, the conservative yearly meeting is established to conserve their understanding of Friends' practice. Ray and Carol, was that halfway accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. All right, I think we have one more comment, and then we have to wrap up because we do have another activity going on, and we're a little over.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to run over. Another question?
My question is, if George Fox were living today, where would he fit into this Quakerism?
He would escape to his hollow tree and read his Bible and try to figure things out. That's always the question. What would early friends think of contemporary friends? I don't know that they would recognize many of the branches of Friends as what they had envisioned. There are those trying to. There was a group that emerged, literally, the Emergent Friends, a decade or so ago, that were trying to recapture the original vision of Friends and return Friends to that kind of early restoration of Christianity. But I don't know of any of the branches that really have it. We all cherry pick and think that their understanding of Quakerism is the true one. some of you know the old joke about the Jewish sailor who was shipwrecked on an island and 15 years later was rescued, and he was showing the sailors of the rescue ship around the island and all that he had done, and built kind of Robinson Crusoe-like. And he showed them 2 synagogues. And they said, well, you're the only person on the island. Why are there 2 synagogues? He said, well, this is the one I worship in. That's the one I wouldn't be caught dead in. That's kind of the attitude too often among friends. That we've got the true understanding of friends that's only partial. And those other folk don't have the true understanding, and yet they believe they do. I really don't know. Early Quakers were very evangelical. You read their writings, they were deeply evangelical, had strong understandings of the divinity of Christ, the reality of heaven and hell, the necessity of the blood sacrifice of Christ, but also decried the hireling ministry and steeple houses and the outward sacraments. I don't know where you find that except in some individual friends who have it all together and are trying to figure out a way to fit into whatever meetings are around. Not much of an answer, but there are. I can't think of many examples of a meeting that George Fox would feel totally comfortable in. Well, thank you all so much for this time together for the series. And I do hope you find engaging to have Kyle Farmbry come in person. And maybe later on, after we get out of this boot, I'll be able to hobble over there and do some other program as well. But have a wonderful day. Thanks again for your attention and your attendance. Wish you all well. Thanks. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you so much. I had to run and talk to somebody real quick. If the recording went well, I will try to send you a link to it just so you have it for files and stuff if you want it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Hello.
Do you have a phone number for Max?